Welcome to another episode of the Ginger Romance. Here, you'll hear anonymous stories from travellers all over the world. Real submissions from real people. Tales of connection, romance, passion, heartbreak, friendship, and love in all its forms. Because every kind of love deserves to be told. This week on the Ginger Romance, we share a love story set in Rishikesh, India. This is a travel romance about timing, friendship, healing, and finally finding the courage to risk losing someone you couldn't imagine living without. Let's get into it. I didn't go to India looking for a relationship. If you asked me before I booked the flights what I wanted, I would have said peace. Not happiness, not adventure, just peace. I'd spent the better part of 2 years carrying around things I hadn't really dealt with. A relationship ending, losing someone close to me, burning myself out at work. I kept convincing myself that I was fine because I was functioning. But functioning isn't the same as feeling all right. One evening, I found myself watching videos about meditation retreats in Rishikesh. Everyone spoke about the place like it slowed time down. I'd never been interested in yoga before, but something about it landed differently that night. 3 weeks later, I'd booked a month-long retreat. When I arrived, it was exactly how I'd imagined, and completely different at the same time. There were temples overlooking the Ganges, monkeys stealing fruit whenever they had the chance, scooters weaving through streets that somehow worked despite looking completely chaotic, and this strange feeling that nobody seemed to be in a rush. The retreat itself was simple. Wake before sunrise, silent meditation, yoga, breakfast, workshops, journaling, more meditation, repeat. The first morning, everyone looked uncomfortable. You could tell that most of us had arrived carrying invisible luggage. Some people couldn't sit still. Others cried before breakfast. Nobody really knew each other, but that's when I first noticed her. Not because she walked in dramatically or because she was trying to get attention. It was actually the opposite. She looked like someone who hoped nobody would notice that she was struggling. We happened to sit opposite each other during the opening circle. When it was her turn to introduce herself, she simply said that she'd come from the UK because she was tired of pretending that everything was okay. Then she stopped talking. Nobody pushed her, and the facilitator just nodded. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me. Later that afternoon, we were paired together for a breathing exercise. We laughed because both of us kept getting the rhythm wrong. It broke the awkwardness. Over dinner, we realised we live less than 3 hours apart back home. Imagine travelling thousands of kilometres only to meet someone from your own country. It felt ridiculous. From then on, we naturally drifted together. Not in a romantic way. More like two people who recognised something familiar within each other. That retreat was not easy. Some workshops asked questions I'd spent years avoiding. There was one afternoon where we had to write a letter to someone we'd never forgive. I stared at a blank page for almost 20 minutes. Eventually, the words came. Then they wouldn't stop. Afterwards, everyone was encouraged to spend an hour alone. I found a quiet stretch by the river. She turned up about 15 minutes later. Neither of us spoke. She just sat nearby. Sometimes that's all people need. Company without conversation. Over the following weeks, we developed this quiet routine. Morning tea after meditation, walking into town after classes, watching the evening ceremony by the river, sharing whatever we'd learnt that day. We never flirted, not once. And looking back now, People probably assumed that we were together, but we genuinely weren't. There wasn't even that will they, won't they tension. Or maybe there was for me, but I just buried it. The strange thing was, I think I knew almost immediately that I loved her. Not the dramatic kind of love people write songs about. It was calmer than that. It was watching someone become lighter every week, seeing her laugh more often, watching her shoulders slowly relax, knowing exactly when she'd had a difficult meditation session before she'd even spoken. One exercise near the end of the retreat involved sharing something we'd never admitted out loud. She spoke first. She said she'd spent years believing she always had to be the strong one, that asking for help made her weak. I remember thinking how many people probably believed that about themselves. When it was my turn, I admitted that I'd become so good at protecting myself that I'd forgotten how to let anyone really know me. She looked straight at me, not with pity, recognition. After the session, we shared a hug. It wasn't romantic, and it wasn't lingering. It just felt like someone saying, I get it. When the retreat ended, everyone exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. Most people probably meant it in the polite way people do after travelling. But we actually did. The difference was our plan afterwards. She was continuing through Nepal and Southeast Asia for another 3 months. I was flying home. At the airport, I remember thinking I should tell her how I felt. Then I talked myself out of it. What was the point? She was about to spend months travelling. Maybe I'd misunderstood everything. Maybe the retreat environment had blurred reality. So I said goodbye like a friend. Back home, life restarted almost immediately. Work, bills, routine. Every now and then, I'd get a message from her. Photos from mountain villages, busy markets or random cafes, and stories about overnight buses. I'd send updates from rainy England. Sometimes we'd have hour-long phone calls. Sometimes we wouldn't speak for a week. It never felt forced. Then one afternoon, she messaged saying she'd landed back in the UK. She joked that proper tea suddenly tasted exciting again. I replied saying that we should catch up. Just coffee, nothing complicated. When I saw her walking towards the cafe, it felt strangely emotional. She looked different, more confident, more settled, but she still smiled exactly the same way. We sat there talking for almost 4 hours about her travels, life, family, everything except the obvious thing. After that, the dates kept on coming. Walks, Sunday lunches, meditations, and yoga classes. We were definitely becoming closer. Everyone around me assumed that we were dating. We weren't. Months passed like that. I'd convinced myself that staying friends was safer than risking everything. One evening, my sister asked me why I kept talking about the same woman if she was only my friend. I didn't really have an answer. A week later, I asked her if she'd like to have dinner with me. She laughed and said, I thought you'd never ask. Apparently, she'd been waiting. Not because she needed me to ask her, but because she didn't want to pressure me. Our first official date barely looked different from our usual catch-ups, except everything felt different because we'd finally acknowledged what had quietly existed all along. Dating was surprisingly easy. There were no games, no pretending. We'd already spent months getting to know each other without expectations. We already knew how each other handled difficult days. We already knew how to communicate. And we already knew what we'd looked like at our lowest. That's a rare foundation. It's been a year and a half now. People sometimes ask where we met. When we say a meditation retreat in India, they usually laugh and assume it's some spiritual love story. But honestly, the retreat didn't make us fall in love. It simply stripped away enough noise for us to recognise someone worth keeping. The romance didn't happen beside the Ganges. It happened afterwards, during ordinary coffees, normal conversations, and quiet weekends. It turns out healing wasn't about arriving in India broken and leaving completely fixed. It was learning how to become the sort of person who could recognise a healthy relationship when it finally appeared. If I'd confessed my feelings during those final days of the retreat, maybe it would have worked. Maybe it wouldn't have. But looking back, I'm grateful that we became friends first. Because by the time we finally called it a date, neither of us was trying to rescue the other anymore. We'd already learned how to stand on our own. We simply chose to walk together after that. That's where the story ends, but not where my thoughts do. I think we can romanticize the spark far too much and underestimate the steady build. There's this idea that if you don't tell someone how you feel straight away, you'll miss your chance. But this story argues the opposite. They met at a time where it would have been easy to mistake vulnerability for romance. But they didn't rush to put a label on it. They let the friendship breathe. Waiting didn't ruin what they had. It gave it room to grow into something neither of them had to force. I wonder how many relationships fail because we're so desperate to define them before they've had the chance to become anything real. So here's a question for you. Would you have told her before she left? Or would you have waited like he did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll catch you in next week's episode. Thanks for listening. Make sure you're following along to keep up to date with weekly stories that will inspire, entertain, and maybe even make you fall in love with the idea of love itself. Got your own romance story and want to be a part of the Ginger Romance community? Check the notes for details on how to submit your own.